Life had never been easy for Elena, but she'd learned to find joy in small things. Every morning at 5, she would wake up in her tiny apartment and make coffee strong enough to wake the dead. By 6, she was already at her first job, cleaning offices in the business district. The pay wasn't much, but it was steady, and Elena needed every penny she could get. Her family meant everything to her. After her parents died in a car accident when she was just 18, Elena had become the backbone of her small family. There was her younger sister Lily, who was studying at the local university and dreamed of becoming a teacher. Then there was Aunt Rosa, her father's sister, who had helped raise them after the accident. Aunt Rosa had never married, dedicating her life to making sure Elena and Lily had everything they needed. Elena's second job was at a small cafe near the university. She loved this job because it reminded her of happier times. The smell of fresh bread and coffee brought back memories of her mother's kitchen. Plus, the tips were good, especially when she worked the evening shift. The regulars knew her by name and always asked about her family. Her third job was the hardest one. 3 nights a week, she worked as a cleaner at a local hospital. The work was exhausting, but it paid well, and Elena couldn't afford to be picky. She would drag herself home at midnight, count the day's earnings, and put most of it in a jar labeled Lily's Education Fund. Everything changed on a Tuesday morning in October. Elena was serving coffee to a regular customer when her phone rang. It was Dr. Martinez from the city hospital, and his voice was serious. "Elena, you need to come here right away." "It's about your aunt." Her hands started shaking so badly she could barely hold the phone. The customer looked worried and asked if she was okay, but Elena couldn't speak. She grabbed her purse, told her boss she had an emergency, and ran to the hospital. Doctor Martinez was waiting for her in the cardiac unit. His kind eyes looked tired, and Elena knew the news wasn't good before he even spoke. "Your aunt had a massive heart attack early this morning. We managed to stabilize her, but she needs emergency surgery. Without it, she won't make it through." The week, Elena felt the world spinning around her. Aunt Rosa was only 55 years old. She had always been healthy, always been strong. How could this happen? What kind of surgery? Elena asked, though she was afraid to hear the answer. "She needs a triple bypass. It's a complex procedure, but Dr. Kim is one of the best cardiac surgeons in the country. The problem is..." Dr. Martinez paused, and Elena knew what was coming. "The surgery costs $200,000. Your aunt's insurance company has denied the claim, saying it's not covered under her current policy." Elena sat down heavily in the plastic hospital chair. $200,000 might as well have been $2 million. She had maybe $3,000 in her savings account. Even if she worked every hour of every day for the next 5 years, she couldn't earn that much money. "How long do we have?" she whispered. "We need to schedule the surgery within the next 2 weeks, or it will be too late." Elena spent the next 3 days trying everything she could think of. She called every bank in the city, but no one would give her a loan without collateral. She started a fundraising page online, but it only raised a few $100s. She even considered selling her small apartment, but it wouldn't be nearly enough. On Friday evening, Elena was sitting by Aunt Rosa's bedside when Lily burst into the room. Her sister's face was flushed with excitement, and she was holding an envelope. "Elena, you're not going to believe this," Lily said, slightly out of breath. "I got a marriage proposal." Elena stared at her sister. "What are you talking about?" Lily sat down and pulled out an official-looking document from the envelope. "Remember Mom's friend, Mrs. Chun? She works for this really wealthy family. The son needs to get married for some business reason, and they're looking for a suitable bride. They're offering a dowry of $300,000. Elena felt her heart skip a beat. $300,000 would not only pay for Aunt Rosa's surgery, but also secure Lily's future. But something felt wrong about the whole situation. "Who is this person?" Elena asked, taking the document from Lily. "His name is Alexander Blackwood. He's the CEO of Blackwood Industries. You know, the huge company that owns half the buildings downtown?" Elena had heard of Alexander Blackwood, and none of it was good. The newspapers called him the Ice King because of his cold business practices. She had read stories about how he had destroyed smaller companies just to expand his empire. People said he was heartless, that he treated his employees like machines, and that he had never been seen smiling in public. Lily, this sounds dangerous. Why would someone like that need to pay for a wife? Mrs. Chun said it's something about his grandfather's will. He needs to be married by his 30th birthday to inherit the full company, and that's next month. The family doesn't care who he marries as long as she's from a respectable family. Elena looked at the contract again. The terms were clear. The bride would receive $300,000 upon marriage, plus all living expenses. In exchange, she would live with Alexander for at least 1 year and attend business events as his wife. After that, they could get divorced if they wanted. Lily, you can't do this. You're only 22 years old. You have your whole life ahead of you, and what about Kevin? You two have been together for 3 years. Lily's face fell. I know, but Elena, Aunt Rosa is dying. This is our only chance to save her. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Aunt Rosa lying in that hospital bed, getting weaker every day. She thought about all the sacrifices her aunt had made for them over the years. Rosa had given up her own dreams of traveling and starting a family to take care of 2 orphan girls. She also thought about Lily's future. Her sister was so close to graduating from university. She had already accepted Kevin's proposal, and they were planning to get married next summer. Elena couldn't let Lily throw away her happiness for money, even if it meant saving their aunt's life. By morning, Elena had made her decision. She found Lily in the kitchen, staring at the marriage contract with tears in her eyes. I can't do it, Elena, Lily whispered. I love Kevin, and I'm scared of this Alexander person. What if he really is as cruel as people say? Elena sat down next to her sister and took her hands. You don't have to do it, Lily. I will. What? Elena, no. You can't sacrifice your life. For us, I'm not sacrificing anything, Elena said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. I don't have anyone special in my life right now, and this is just a business arrangement. 1 year, and then I'll be free with enough money to start over anywhere I want. But deep down, Elena was terrified. She had heard the stories about Alexander Blackwood, and none of them were pleasant. Still, she couldn't let her aunt die, and she couldn't let Lily ruin her future. The next day, Elena met with Mrs. Chun to discuss the arrangement. The older woman looked surprised when Elena explained that she would be taking Lily's place. Are you sure about this, dear? Mr. Blackwood is not an easy man to live with. He's very demanding and has very specific expectations. I'm sure, Elena said, signing the contract with a hand that only trembled slightly. When do I meet him? The wedding is scheduled for next Friday. You'll meet him at the ceremony. As Elena walked home that afternoon, she wondered what she had gotten herself into. In less than a week, she would be married to one of the most feared men in the city. But every time doubt crept in, she remembered Aunt Rosa's weak smile and knew she had made the right choice. The wedding day arrived faster than Elena had expected. She stood in front of the mirror in a simple white dress that Mrs. Chun had provided, trying to calm her racing heart. Today, she would meet the man who would control her life for the next year. The ceremony was held in a small chapel with only a few witnesses present. Elena's hands were shaking as she walked down the aisle, but she kept her head high. At the altar stood Alexander Blackwood, and Elena was surprised by what she saw. He was tall and impressive, with dark hair and sharp features, but it was his eyes that caught her attention. They were steel gray and completely unreadable. When he looked at her, Elena felt like he was seeing right through her, analyzing her like a business deal. The ceremony was brief and cold. Alexander barely looked at her as they exchanged vows, and his voice was flat and emotionless. When it came time to kiss the bride, he gave her a quick, formal kiss that felt more like a handshake. As they signed the marriage certificate, Elena realized there was no going back. She was now Mrs. Alexander Blackwood, married to a man who seemed to have ice water running through his veins. But as she thought about Aunt Rosa, who would have her surgery the next week, Elena knew she had made the right choice. The question was, Would she survive the next year with a man who showed no emotion and treated everything like a business transaction? Moving into Alexander's penthouse felt like stepping into a different world. Elena had lived her entire life in small, cramped spaces where you could hear the neighbors arguing through thin walls. Now she found herself in a place so quiet and spacious that her footsteps echoed on the marble floors. The penthouse occupied the entire top floor of the city's most expensive building. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city skyline, and every piece of furniture looked like it belonged in a museum. Elena was afraid to touch anything, worried she might break something that cost more than she used to. Make in a year, Alexander had barely spoken to her during the car ride from the chapel. His driver, an older man named Robert, had been more welcoming than her new husband. At least Robert had smiled at her and helped carry her single suitcase upstairs. "This will be your room," Alexander said, opening a door to reveal a bedroom. Larger than her old apartment? The bed was enormous, covered in white silk sheets, and there was even a small sitting area by the window. "You have your own bathroom and closet. Mrs. Park will help you with anything you need." Mrs. Park turned out to be the housekeeper, a kind woman in her 50s who seemed genuinely happy to have Elena in the house. She was the first person to make Elena feel even slightly welcome. "Don't worry, dear," Mrs. Park whispered when Alexander left for his study. "He's not as scary as he seems. He's just not used to having people around." Elena wanted to believe her, but Alexander's behavior made it hard. He left for work before she woke up and came home after she'd gone to bed. When they did see each other, usually at breakfast or dinner, he would nod politely and ask if she had everything she needed. But he never really looked at her, never asked how she was feeling, never tried to start a real conversation. The first week was the loneliest Elena had ever felt. She was used to being busy every minute of the day, working 3 jobs and taking care of her family. Now she had nothing to do except wander around the huge penthouse and try not to feel like an intruder. Mrs. Park tried to keep her company, but she had her own work to do. Elena offered to help with cleaning or cooking, but Mrs. Park looked horrified at the suggestion. "Oh no, Mrs. Blackwood, you can't do that. Mr. Alexander would be very upset if he found out I let you work." Mrs. Blackwood, the name still sounded strange to Elena's ears. She didn't feel like Mrs. Blackwood, she felt like Elena, the girl who cleaned offices and served coffee, pretending to be someone she single quotes, the only bright spot in her day was. The phone calls from the hospital. Aunt Rosa's surgery had been successful and she was recovering well. The doctors said she would make a full recovery, which made all of Elena's sacrifice worthwhile. When she told Lily the good news, her sister cried with relief. "I still can't believe you did this for us," Lily said during one of their daily phone calls. "How is he treating you?" "Is he as cold as people say?" Elena looked around the luxurious penthouse and sighed. "He's not mean to me, Lily. He's just ... Not there, it's like I'm invisible." "Maybe that's better than being cruel?" Elena wasn't sure. Sometimes she wondered if cruelty might be easier to deal with than this complete indifference. Everything started to change in the second week, though it began with something small that Elena almost missed. She had been having trouble sleeping in the huge, unfamiliar bed. One night she decided to make herself some tea and maybe read a book in the living room. As she walked past Alexander's study, she noticed the light was still on. The door was slightly open, and she could see him slumped over his desk, fast asleep. Elena stood there for a moment, unsure what to do. He looked different when he was sleeping, younger and less intimidating. His dark hair had fallen across his forehead, and for the first time since she'd met him, his face looked peaceful instead of stern. She noticed he was still wearing his suit from earlier that day, and there were papers scattered all around him. His computer was still on, showing what looked like financial reports. Elena realized he must have been working for hours after coming home. Without really thinking about it, she went to the kitchen and made 2 cups of tea. When she returned to the study, Alexander was still asleep. Elena quietly placed 1 cup on his desk, being careful not to wake him, and went back to her room. The next morning, she found the empty teacup in the kitchen sink. Alexander didn't mention it, but when she looked at him across the breakfast table, she thought she saw something different in his eyes. Maybe it was just her imagination. But he seemed to look at her for a few seconds longer than usual. That evening, Elena decided to try something. Instead of eating dinner alone in her room as she usually did, she went to the kitchen and asked Mrs. Park if she could cook something simple. "Are you sure, dear?" "I can make whatever you'd like." "I know, but I miss cooking. It helps me relax." "Mrs. Park smiled and showed Elena where everything was kept. Elena decided to make something simple but comforting: chicken soup with vegetables and homemade bread. It was one of Aunt Rosa's recipes, and the familiar smells made her feel less homesick. When Alexander came home that night, he stopped in the doorway of the dining room, looking surprised to see Elena setting the table for two. "I made dinner," she said simply. "I thought you might be hungry." For a moment, Alexander just stood there, and Elena worried she had overstepped some invisible boundary. But then he nodded and sat down at the table. They ate in silence at first, but Elena noticed that Alexander seemed to be enjoying the food. He ate 2 full bowls of soup and several pieces of bread, which was more than she had ever seen him eat. "This is very good," he said finally, and Elena felt a warm glow of satisfaction. "It's my aunt's recipe. She taught me to cook when I was 12. How is she doing?" Alexander asked, and Elena was surprised. It was the first personal question he had ever asked her. "Much better, thanks to you. The surgery went perfectly, and she's already asking when she can go home." Alexander nodded but didn't say anything else. Still, Elena felt like they had made some small progress. Over the next few days, Elena continued to cook dinner, and Alexander continued to join her. Their conversations were still limited, but they were talking, which was more than before. Elena learned that Alexander had studied at Harvard Business School, that he had taken over his grandfather's company when he was only 25, and that he worked 16-hour days most of the time. "Don't you ever take a break?" Elena asked one evening as they shared a simple pasta dinner she had made. "There's too much work to do," Alexander replied. "If I don't stay on top of everything, people lose their jobs." Elena was surprised by his answer. She had expected him to say something about making money or beating his competitors. She hadn't expected him to mention caring about his employees. "How many people work for your company?" "About 15,000 directly. Maybe 50,000 if you count all the subsidiary companies." Elena tried to imagine being responsible for that many people and their families. The pressure must be enormous. "That must be very stressful," she said softly. Alexander looked at her with those unreadable gray eyes. "It is," he said simply. After that conversation, Elena started paying more attention to Alexander's routine. She noticed that he often skipped breakfast because he was in such a hurry to get to work. She began getting up early to make sure coffee and toast were ready when he came downstairs. She also noticed that he frequently worked late into the night, often falling asleep at his desk like that first time she had found him. Elena started leaving a thermos of coffee and a small snack outside his study door on those nights. Alexander never mentioned these small gestures, but Elena could tell he noticed them. Sometimes she would find a brief "thank you" note next to the empty thermos, written in his careful handwriting. The breakthrough came 3 weeks after their wedding. Elena woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of Alexander's voice coming from his study. At first, she thought he was on a business call, but as she got closer, she realized he sounded upset. "I don't care what the board thinks," he was saying, his voice tighter than she had ever heard it. "We're not laying off a single person. Find another way to cut costs." Elena could only hear one side of the conversation, but it was clear that Alexander was arguing with someone about business decisions. His voice got louder and more frustrated as the call went on. "Those people have families to feed. I won't destroy their lives just to make our quarterly numbers look better." When the call ended, Elena heard Alexander slam something down on his desk. She was about to go back to her room when she heard another sound that made her freeze. Alexander was crying. It wasn't loud sobbing, just quiet, exhausted tears, but it was the most human sound she had ever heard him make. Elena stood in the hallway, unsure whether to go to him or leave him alone. In the end, she decided to respect his privacy and went back to her room, but something had changed. For the first time, Elena saw Alexander not as the cold, heartless businessman everyone said he was, but as a man carrying an enormous burden. A man who cared so much about protecting his employees that he would cry alone in his study rather than make decisions that would hurt them. Maybe, Elena thought as she lay in bed that night, there was more to Alexander Blackwood than anyone knew. Maybe the ice-cold exterior was just a mask he wore to protect himself in a world that demanded he be. Life had started to feel almost normal between Elena and Alexander. They shared breakfast most mornings now, and their conversations had grown from polite exchanges to something that felt almost like friendship. Elena had even started to look forward to their quiet dinners together, where Alexander would sometimes tell her about his day or ask about her family. Everything changed on a rainy Thursday morning in November. Elena was in the kitchen helping Mrs. Park prepare lunch when her phone rang. The caller ID showed Dr. Martinez's number, and Elena's heart immediately started racing. Aunt Rosa had been doing so well in her recovery that the doctors had even talked about releasing her from the hospital soon. "Elena, I need you to come to the hospital right away." Dr. Martinez's voice was tense, the same tone he had used 3 months ago when everything first went wrong. "What's happening? Is Aunt Rosa okay?" "She's stable for now, but there have been complications. We need to talk in person." Elena's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hang up the phone. Mrs. Park took one look at her face and immediately called for the driver to bring the car around. At the hospital, Dr. Martinez led Elena to his office with the same grave expression she remembered from before. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "Your aunt's body is rejecting one of the heart valves we replaced during surgery," he explained gently. "It's not uncommon, but it's serious. She needs another operation, and this time it's even more complicated than the first one." Elena felt like the floor was disappearing beneath her feet. But she was doing so well. She was talking about coming home next week. "I know, and I'm sorry. This is one of the risks we discussed before the first surgery, but we had hoped it wouldn't happen." "What kind of operation does she need?" Dr. Martinez pulled out a folder filled with medical charts and reports. "She needs a complete valve replacement. But this time, we'll need to use an artificial valve instead of repairing her natural one. The surgery is more intensive, and the recovery time will be longer." Elena's voice came out as barely a whisper. "How much will it cost?" "The surgery itself will be around $150,000, plus the extended hospital stay." "And rehabilitation?" "We're looking at about $200,000 total." Elena closed her eyes and tried to breathe. She had used all of Alexander's marriage payment for the first surgery and Aunt Rosa's initial recovery. There was no money left, and she had no idea how to get more. "How long do we have to decide?" "Elena, I'm going to be honest with you. Your aunt's condition is deteriorating quickly. If we don't operate within the next few days, we might lose her." Elena somehow made it through the rest of the conversation with Dr. Martinez, but she felt like she was moving underwater. Everything seemed distant and unreal. She sat by Aunt Rosa's bedside for hours, watching the monitors that tracked her heartbeat and breathing. Aunt Rosa was awake but weak. She took Elena's hand and squeezed it gently. "Don't look so worried, my dear," she whispered. "I'm tougher than I look." Elena tried to smile, but tears started falling down her cheeks instead. "The doctors say you need another surgery. Then I'll have another surgery. We've come this far, haven't we?" But Elena knew it wasn't that simple. Where would she get $200,000? She had already sacrificed her freedom for a year to save Aunt Rosa once. What was left to give? By the time Elena got home that evening, she was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. Alexander was in the living room reading business reports when she walked in, and he looked up immediately. "You're later than usual," he said, and then he saw her face. "What's wrong?" Elena had been holding herself together all day, but something about the genuine concern in Alexander's voice broke her last bit of control. She collapsed onto the couch and started crying harder than she had since her parents died. Alexander sat frozen for a moment, clearly unsure what to do. Elena had never seen him deal with emotions before, and she could tell he was uncomfortable. But then, slowly, he moved closer and put his arm around her shoulders. "Tell me what happened," he said quietly, through her tears. Elena told him about Aunt Rosa's complications, about the need for another surgery, about the money they didn't have. Alexander listened without interrupting, his arm still around her shoulders, occasionally handing her tissues from the box on the coffee table. "I don't know what to do," Elena sobbed. "I can't lose her, Alexander. She's all the family I have left. Besides Lily, she gave up everything to take care of us after our parents died. I can't let her die because of money." "You won't," Alexander said firmly. "I'll take care of it." Elena looked up at him through her tears. "What do you mean?" "I mean I'll pay for the surgery. All of it. Don't worry about the money." "Alexander, I can't ask you to do that. You've already done so much." "You're not asking, I'm offering." He handed her another tissue. "Call Dr. Martinez tomorrow morning and tell him to schedule the surgery as soon as possible. Tell him to use the best surgical team available, regardless of cost." Elena stared at him in disbelief. "Why would you do this for me? Our marriage is just a business arrangement." Alexander was quiet for a long moment, and Elena could see him struggling with something internal. Finally he spoke, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "Because you're my wife," he said simply, "and because I care about what happens to you." The next morning, Elena woke up wondering if the previous night had been a dream. But when she came downstairs for breakfast, Alexander was already on the phone with someone, giving them Dr. Martinez's contact information and instructions to handle all the financial arrangements for Aunt Rosa's surgery. When he hung up, he looked at Elena across the breakfast table. "It's all taken care of," Dr. Martinez should have. "Everything he needs by this afternoon." "Alexander, I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me," he said. But Elena noticed a slight warmth in his gray eyes that hadn't been there before. Over the next few days, as they waited for Aunt Rosa's surgery, something shifted between Elena and Alexander. The walls he had built around himself seemed to crack a little more each day. Elena discovered that Alexander had personally called Dr. Martinez to discuss Aunt Rosa's case. He had also arranged for her to have a private room with the best view in the hospital and had made sure she had access to the top cardiac specialists in the country. "You didn't have to do all that," Elena told him as they walked through the hospital corridor together the day before the surgery. "I wanted to make sure she gets the best possible care," Alexander replied. "She's important to you, so she's important to me." The night before Aunt Rosa's surgery, Elena couldn't sleep. She found herself in the kitchen at 2 a.m, making tea and trying not to think about all the things that could go wrong. Alexander appeared in the doorway, wearing a simple t-shirt and sweatpants instead of his usual formal attire. Elena had never seen him dressed so casually, and it made him look younger and more approachable. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. Elena shook her head. "I keep thinking about tomorrow. What if something goes wrong? What if this surgery doesn't work either?" Alexander poured himself a cup of tea and sat down beside her at the kitchen counter. "Your aunt is strong. She survived the first surgery, and she survived this one too." "How can you be so sure?" "Because she has something worth fighting for," Alexander said, looking directly at Elena. "She has you and Lily. That's powerful motivation." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, drinking their tea and watching the city lights through the kitchen window. Finally, Alexander spoke again. "Can I tell you something, Elena?" She nodded. "I haven't had a family since my grandfather died 10 years ago. I'd forgotten what it felt like to worry about someone else, to want to protect them." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "These past few weeks, watching you care for your aunt, seeing how much your family means to you, it's reminded me of what I've been missing." Elena felt her heart skip a beat. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that this arrangement between us, this marriage, it doesn't feel like just business anymore, at least not to me." Before Elena could respond, Alexander stood up and rinsed his cup in the sink. "You should try to get some sleep. Tomorrow is going to be a long day." As he walked toward the door, Elena called out to him, "Alexander?" He turned back to her. "Thank you for everything." I know you didn't have to help us, but you did anyway. That means more to me than you'll ever know." Alexander studied her face for a moment, that same unreadable expression in his eyes. But this time Elena thought she saw something new there. Something that looked almost like tenderness. "Good night, Elena," he said softly, as Elena finally went to bed that night. She realized that somewhere between her tears on the couch and their quiet conversation in the kitchen, everything had changed. Alexander wasn't just the cold businessman she had married to save her aunt. He was becoming something else entirely. He was becoming someone she was starting to care about, maybe more than she should. And from the way he had looked at her tonight, Elena wondered if maybe, just maybe, he was starting to feel the same way about her. Aunt Rosa's surgery was a complete success. Dr. Martinez called it one of the smoothest operations he had ever performed. And within a week, she was sitting up in bed, complaining about the hospital food and asking when she could go home. Elena had never felt such relief in her entire life, but something even more unexpected was happening between her and Alexander. After that night in the kitchen, their relationship had shifted into something Elena couldn't quite define. They spent more time together, their conversations grew deeper, and Elena found herself looking forward to seeing him each day. Alexander had started coming home earlier from work, often arriving just in time for dinner. He would ask about Elena's day, tell her stories about his childhood with his grandfather, and sometimes they would sit together in the living room afterward, just talking until late into the night. Elena learned that Alexander had lost his parents in a plane crash when he was only 15. His grandfather had raised him after that, teaching him everything about running the family business. But his grandfather had also been a strict man who believed that showing emotion was a sign of weakness. "He used to tell me that a good businessman never lets anyone see his feelings," Alexander said one evening as they sat by the fireplace. "He said it made you vulnerable, gave people power over you." "Is that why you're so serious all the time?" Elena asked gently. Alexander smiled, and Elena realized it was the first real smile she had ever seen from him. It completely transformed his face, making him look younger and more relaxed. "Maybe," he admitted. "Old habits are hard to break." Elena was discovering that beneath Alexander's cold exterior was a man with a dry sense of humor, a love for old movies, and a surprising knowledge of cooking. He had learned to cook as a teenager when his grandfather was too busy with work to remember about meals. "You should cook for me sometime," Elena suggested one night as they cleaned up after dinner together. "I'm not sure you'd trust my cooking," Alexander replied, but Elena could see he was pleased by the suggestion. "I trusted you with my life when I married you. I think I can trust you with a meal." Alexander looked at her with an expression Elena couldn't read. "Is that really how you see it? That you trusted me with your life?" "Well, didn't I?" Elena said, suddenly feeling shy under his intense gaze. "I suppose you did," Alexander said quietly. "I never thought about it that way before." 3 weeks after Aunt Rosa's surgery, Elena woke up one morning to find that Alexander wasn't at the breakfast table. Mrs. Park looked worried when Elena asked about him. "He didn't come down for his morning coffee," Mrs. Park said. "He never misses his coffee." Elena went upstairs and knocked softly on Alexander's bedroom door. When there was no answer, she gently pushed it open. Alexander was still in bed, but even from the doorway, Elena could see that something was wrong. His face was flushed and he was breathing heavily. "Alexander?" Elena approached the bed cautiously. When she touched his forehead, it was burning, hot with fever. "I'm fine," Alexander mumbled, trying to sit up. "Just need to get to the office." "You're not fine, and you're not going anywhere," Elena said firmly. "You have a high fever. We need to call a doctor." "No doctors," Alexander protested weakly. "Just need to sleep it off." But Elena wasn't taking no for an answer. She called Dr. Martinez, who came to the penthouse within an hour. After examining Alexander, he diagnosed him with pneumonia and strict orders for bed rest. "He's been working too hard and not taking care of himself," Dr. Martinez told Elena privately. "His body just couldn't fight off the infection. He needs complete rest for at least a week, maybe 2. Elena spent the next several days taking care of Alexander, much to his protests. She brought him soup and tea, made sure he took his medicine on time, and sat by his bed reading to him when he couldn't sleep. "You don't have to do this," Alexander said on the third day, his voice still rough from coughing. "I know I don't have." "T.O.," Elena replied, adjusting his pillows. "I want to." "Why?" Elena paused, a spoonful of soup halfway to his mouth. It was a good question, and one she had been asking herself. Why did she care so much about taking care of him? When had this man, who had started as a stranger in a business arrangement, become someone she genuinely worried about? "Because you took care of me when I needed it," she said finally. "And because I care about you." Alexander stared at her for a long moment, and Elena felt her cheeks getting warm. She had said more than she intended to. "Elena," Alexander said softly, but before he could continue, he was overcome by another coughing fit. That night Alexander's fever spiked dangerously high. Elena found him in the middle of the night, delirious and calling out names she didn't recognize. But then, clearly, she heard him say her name. "Elena," he whispered, his eyes closed, his hand reaching out as if searching for something. "Don't leave, please don't leave." Elena took his hand gently. "I'm here, Alexander. I'm not going anywhere." Even in his fevered state, Alexander seemed to calm down when he heard her voice. He held onto her hand tightly, and Elena stayed by his side all night, watching over him and making sure his fever didn't get worse. When Alexander woke up the next morning, his fever had finally broken. He looked around the room, confused, until his eyes settled on Elena, who was asleep in the chair beside his bed, still holding his hand. "Elena?" he said quietly. She woke up immediately. "How are you feeling?" "Better," he said, and his voice did sound stronger. "Have you been here all night?" Elena felt embarrassed suddenly. "You were really sick. I was worried." Alexander didn't let go of her hand. "What did I say?" "Last night, when the fever was bad?" "I remember talking, but I don't remember what I said." Elena hesitated. Should she tell him that he had asked her not to leave? That he had called her name like she was the most important thing in the world to him? "You were just confused from the fever," she said instead. "Nothing important?" But Alexander was looking at her with those sharp gray eyes, and Elena had the feeling he knew she wasn't telling him everything over the next few days. As Alexander recovered, something had definitely changed between them. He watched her more closely, and Elena caught him staring at her several times with an expression she couldn't interpret. On the day Dr. Martinez cleared Alexander to return to work, Elena was in the kitchen making his favorite chicken soup when he appeared in the doorway. "Elena, we need to talk." Something in his tone made Elena's heart start beating faster. She turned off the stove and followed him to the living room. "I remember more about that night than I told you," Alexander said, sitting down across from her. "I remember calling your name. I remember asking you not to leave." Elena felt her face getting warm again. "Alexander, you were sick." "People say all kinds of things when they have a fever. Do they?" Alexander leaned forward. "Because I think I said exactly what I've been wanting to say for weeks now." Elena's heart was pounding so hard she was sure Alexander could hear it. "What do you mean?" "I mean that this marriage, this arrangement we made, it stopped being just business for me a long time ago." Alexander ran his hand through his hair, looking nervous for the first time since Elena had known him. "I know this wasn't part of our deal. And I know you have every right to walk away when our year is up, but I need you to know how I feel." "How do you feel?" Elena whispered. Alexander looked directly into her eyes. "I'm in love with you, Elena. Completely, hopelessly in love with you. I think I started falling for you the first time you made me dinner, and I haven't been able to stop since." Elena felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. Alexander Blackwood, the man everyone called the Ice King, had just told her he loved her. "I know this complicates things," Alexander continued when Elena didn't respond. "I know you married me to save your aunt, not because you wanted to be with me. But I couldn't go on pretending that this was still just a business arrangement." Elena stood up suddenly, causing Alexander to look worried. "Elena, if this makes you uncomfortable, we can pretend I never said anything. We can go back to the way things were." But Elena wasn't backing away. Instead, she moved closer to him until she was standing right in front of his chair. Alexander, she said softly, what if I told you that I've been falling in love with you too? The expression on Alexander's face was worth everything Elena had been through in the past 4 months. Hope, disbelief, and joy all flickered across his features. Are you saying that? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm saying that when you were sick, I was terrified of losing you. I'm saying that the best part of my day is when you come home from work. I'm saying that somewhere along the way, this stopped being about the money and started being about you. Alexander stood up slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. Elena, are you sure? Because once we cross this line, there's no going back to just being business partners. Elena reached up and touched his face gently. I'm sure. When Alexander kissed her, it was nothing like their cold, formal wedding kiss. This kiss was warm and gentle and full of all the feelings they had both been holding back for months. When they finally broke apart, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Elena, he said again. I love you too, Elena replied, and meant it with every part of her heart. As they held each other in the living room where they had shared so many quiet conversations, Elena realized that for 3 beautiful months, Elena and Alexander lived in what felt like a fairy tale. They were no longer just husband and wife on paper, they were truly in love, and it showed in everything they did together. Alexander had transformed completely from the cold, distant man Elena had first married. He would bring her flowers for no reason, cook breakfast for her on weekends, and they would spend hours talking about everything and nothing. Elena had never been happier in her entire life. Aunt Rosa had made a full recovery and was back home, constantly teasing Elena about how different she sounded when she talked about Alexander now. Even Lily had noticed a change when she visited the penthouse. You're glowing, Elena, Lily had said during their last visit. I've never seen you look so happy. Elena and Alexander had started making plans for the future. They talked about renewing their vows in a real ceremony with their families present. Alexander had even mentioned wanting children someday, which made Elena's heart flutter with excitement. Everything was perfect until the day Elena's world came crashing down. She was having lunch with Alexander in his office when his assistant knocked on the door, looking nervous and upset. Mr. Blackwood, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's someone here to see you. He says it's urgent. The man who walked into Alexander's office was tall and expensively dressed, with a cold smile that made Elena immediately uncomfortable. Alexander's face went completely pale when he saw him. Vincent Sterling, Alexander said, his voice tight with tension. What are you doing here? Hello, cousin, Vincent replied with a smirk. Aren't you going to introduce me to your lovely wife? Elena looked between the two men, confused. Alexander had never mentioned having a cousin, and the tension in the room was so thick she could barely breathe. Elena, this is Vincent Sterling. He's a business competitor, Alexander said carefully. Vincent, this is my wife, Elena. Vincent's smile got wider, and Elena didn't like it at all. Oh, I know exactly who Elena is? In fact, I know quite a lot about your interesting marriage arrangement. Elena felt her stomach drop. How could this stranger know about their original agreement? What do you want, Vincent? Alexander stood up, moving protectively closer to Elena. I want what's rightfully mine, Alexander. I want control of Blackwood Industries. Vincent pulled out a folder and dropped it on Alexander's desk. You see, I've been doing some research into your marriage. Very interesting story. A desperate young woman who married you to pay for her aunt's medical bills. A purely business transaction with no love involved. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. Even though their relationship had changed completely since then, the original facts were still true. According to grandfather's will, Vincent continued, you needed to be in a legitimate marriage based on love to inherit the company. But this wasn't a real marriage, was it? It was a financial arrangement. Alexander's jaw was clenched so tight Elena could see the muscles twitching. Our marriage is completely legal and legitimate. Legal, yes, but legitimate? Vincent laughed. I don't think so. I have proof of the original contract, documentation of the payment made to Elena's family, even recorded phone conversations with the matchmaker who arranged everything. Elena felt sick to her stomach. How had Vincent gotten all this information? What I'm wondering, Vincent said, looking directly at Elena with cruel eyes, is whether Mrs. Blackwood here knows that when this little charade is exposed, it won't just destroy Alexander's claim to the company. It will completely ruin her reputation, too. Leave her out of this, Alexander said dangerously. Oh, but she's the key to everything, isn't she? Vincent's smile was pure evil now. Elena, do you really think society will believe that you fell in love with Alexander after taking his money? Or will they think you're just a gold digger who got caught? Elena couldn't speak. She felt like she was suffocating. Here's what's going to happen, Vincent said, pulling out another set of papers. Elena is going to sign these divorce papers, admitting that the marriage was a fraud. Alexander will step down as CEO, and I'll take over the company that should have been mine in the first place? And if we refuse? Alexander asked, though Elena could hear the defeat in his voice. Then I go to the media with everything? Alexander loses the company anyway, and Elena becomes the most hated woman in the city. Her family's restaurant will be boycotted, her sister will be kicked out of university, and her precious aunt will be known as the woman whose medical bills destroyed an honorable man's life. Elena felt tears starting to fall down her cheeks. Vincent had thought of everything. Even if she and Alexander fought this, the scandal would destroy not just them, but everyone Elena loved. I'll give you 24 hours to decide, Vincent said, heading for the door. But really, there's only one choice here. Elena knows what she has to do. After Vincent left, Elena and Alexander sat in terrible silence. Elena could see the pain and fury in Alexander's eyes, but she could also see something else, the same defeated look he'd had when they first got married. We have to fight this, Alexander said finally. I won't let him destroy you. Elena wiped her tears and stood up. Slowly. No, Alexander, he's right. There's only one thing I can do. Elena, don't even think about it. I have to, Elena said, her voice breaking. If I don't, Vincent will destroy everyone I care about. My family, your employees, everyone who depends on you. I can't let that happen. I don't care about the company, Alexander said desperately. I care about you. We'll figure out another way. Elena looked at the man she loved more than life itself, and her heart broke completely. There is no other way, and you know it. Vincent has everything he needs to destroy us all. At night, Elena packed her belongings while Alexander was in his study, probably trying to find some legal way to fight Vincent. She left a letter on his desk and slipped out of the penthouse before he could stop her. The next morning, Elena met Vincent at his lawyer's office and signed the divorce papers. Her hands shook as she wrote her name, but she forced herself to think about Aunt Rosa, about Lily's future, about all the employees who would lose their jobs if Blackwood Industries collapsed. The media explosion was even worse than Elena had expected. Within hours, her picture was on every news website with headlines calling her a con artist and a gold digger. Reporters camped outside Aunt Rosa's house, and Lily had to stop going to classes because of the harassment. Elena moved back into her old tiny apartment and tried to rebuild her life. But everywhere she went, people recognized her and whispered cruel things. She lost her job at the cafe when customers started, leaving whenever she appeared. The worst part was watching Alexander on the news, forced to defend a marriage that everyone now believed was fake. He looked exhausted and broken, and Elena knew it was all her fault. 3 weeks after she signed the divorce papers, Elena was walking home from another failed job interview when a car pulled up beside her. To her shock, Alexander got out. Elena, we need to talk. Alexander, I can't. If people see us together, it will only make things worse. I don't care what people think anymore, Alexander said firmly. Get in the car. Against her better judgment, Elena got in. Alexander drove them to a small park outside the city where no one would recognize them. I'm not accepting this, Alexander said as soon as they sat down on a bench. I'm not accepting that Vincent wins and we lose everything we built together. Alexander, it's over. The damage is done. No, it's not. Alexander turned to face her. Completely. Elena, I love you. Not because of any contract or arrangement, but because you're the most amazing woman I've ever known. You're kind, you're brave, and you sacrificed everything to save the people you love. Elena started crying. Again, but no one will ever believe that now. Then we'll prove it to them. Alexander took her hands. Marry me again, Elena, not for money or business or family obligations. Marry me because you love me and I love you. Alexander, that's crazy. The scandal will never go away. Maybe not, Alexander admitted. But I'd rather face scandal with you than live in respectability without you, and you know what? Vincent made one big mistake. What? Alexander smiled for the first time in weeks. He assumed that people wouldn't believe our love is real. But love like ours doesn't come along often, Elena. When we're together, when people see us together, they'll know it's genuine. Elena wanted to believe him, but she was scared. What about your company? What about all those people who depend on you? I've been working on that, Alexander said. It turns out Vincent's information gathering wasn't entirely legal. My lawyers found some very interesting evidence about how he got those recordings and documents. We might be able to fight this after all. Over the next month, Alexander's legal team worked around the clock to expose Vincent's illegal activities. It turned out he had bribed Elena's original contact, hacked into private medical records, and even hired people to illegally record private conversations. When the evidence came to light, public opinion started to shift. People began to see Vincent as the real villain, and Elena as a young woman who had been caught in an impossible situation. The turning point came when Alexander held another press conference, but this time Elena stood beside him. 6 months ago, I married Elena for business reasons,